Welcome, and thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation.
Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into a genuinely hidden crisis, one that's quietly but totally restructuring the economy right under our feet. You know, we usually think of real estate as just housing, right? Or maybe those shiny downtown office towers. But there is a massive structural realignment happening right now in Canadian industrial real estate. We're talking about the huge concrete footprints and the hum of logistics that literally keep the country running. Think of this as a cinematic documentary-style overview of the physical limits, the absolute soaring costs, and the wild cutting-edge robotics that are redefining the warehouses holding, well, basically everything we buy. Okay, let's dive straight into this. 15%. That is the new ceiling for what real estate consumes out of total supply chain costs in Tier 1 Canadian markets. Historically, right, a warehouse was just a cheap, flat box. You just threw things in there while you figured out the hard parts, labor and transportation. Leasing the building was honestly just an afterthought. But today, that physical box is pulling a massive amount of financial tension into the whole supply chain. It's not just a backdrop anymore, it's a primary financial burden. And to understand exactly why this number has completely exploded, we actually have to look at the ground itself. Act 1, the geographic stranglehold, or the physical limits of expansion. So Canada's primary consumer gateways are literally choking on their own boundaries. Let's look at Metro Vancouver first. You are looking at a market with zero raw industrial acreage left, literally none. And it's all because of hard, immovable borders. You've got the Pacific Ocean to the west, the massive coast mountains to the north, the U.S. border locking everything into the south, and then the Provincial Agricultural Land Reserve acting as this strict, unyielding legislative wall to the east. These aren't just minor hurdles. These are geographic and legislative realities that completely prevent any outward industrial sprawl. And the situation is remarkably similar over in the Greater Toronto Area. The GTA is physically boxed in by Lake Ontario to the south. Plus, surrounding the Golden Horseshoe, you have over 2 million acres of protected Ontario Greenbelt. Again, these are incredibly strict market constraints, because developers can't just pave outward into that green space. They are totally forced back inward toward higher density infill sites. And that means navigating prolonged municipal permitting and zoning approvals. The land supply is just capped. And this brilliantly illustrates how those exact constraints are driving the economics. Just look at these compressed vacancy rates. In Vancouver and Toronto, vacancy is sitting at a razor-thin 3 to 5%. Because of those immovable boundaries we just talked about, average net asking rents have hit historic highs, over $24 a square foot in Vancouver and pushing $20 in Toronto. But then compare that directly to the Calgary regional market, where an unconstrained land supply keeps rents hovering way down around $10 to $12 a square foot. It's simple. Geography dictates the economics. Act 2, the economics of the pallet, or the true cost of space. Now, shifting our lens down to the actual warehouse floor, notice the staggering jump in overhead here. Historically, underwriting a supply chain basically meant dedicating maybe 3 to 5% of your expenses to the actual building, while transport and labor just ate up 80%. But today, in prime Canadian Tier 1 markets, that footprint demands 8 to 15%. And remember, in places like Mississauga or Richmond, you have to add triple net costs, so taxes, maintenance, insurance, which can casually add another $4 to $7 per square foot right on top of that base rent. This is where the math gets genuinely dramatic. $200. In a standard warehouse with those conventional wide aisles, the sheer floor space for a single pallet position now costs over $200 annually. You are essentially paying downtown micro-apartment rent for a piece of wood holding some boxes. And that's before a single worker even touches it. Actually, scratch that. Before a forklift even gets near it. The pure, unadulterated cost of just existing in a Tier 1 market is staggering. The real-world impact of this metric is completely wild. We have actually reached a point where premium ground-floor industrial rents in secondary suburban corridors are exceeding the rents of tertiary retail strip malls on a net effective basis. Just let that sink in for a second. It is literally more expensive to rent a concrete box for distribution than it is to rent a storefront. Because of this, low-margin distributors are being fundamentally pushed out of core urban zones. They just can't survive the rent. Act 3, vertical and automated, or engineering a way up. So what happens? How does the industry adapt when they can't build out and they can't afford the ground? Well, Pioneered in hyperdense markets like Tokyo and Singapore, multi-story warehousing has finally arrived in Canada. And we are talking about sheer structural physics here. Imagine massive, exterior spiral ramps, engineered so full, 53-foot tractor trailers can drive directly up to the second floor. Insane, right? For facilities without ramps, they use vertical reciprocating conveyors, basically giant mechanical lifts, hauling pallets up at 100 feet per minute. And the ground floors? They require live load capacities of up to 700 pounds per square foot, with cavernous 40-foot clear heights, all to maximize every single buildable inch. But building up isn't just about pouring thicker concrete floors, it's about what goes inside them. And this brings us to ASRS, or Automated Storage and Retrieval Systems. Instead of buying more horizontal ground, operators are optimizing cubic volume. These are ultra-dense systems. Picture giant aluminum grids where autonomous robots zip around on top to grab inventory bins, or massive high-bay pallet cranes operating in these super narrow aisles, reaching up to 150 feet in the air. It completely eliminates the need for traditional, human-picking aisles. So the crucial point here is the massive operational leap this automation provides. In a traditional setup, a human walking up and down aisles with a cart can manage, about 60 to 80 picks per hour. But when you switch to autonomous mobile robots in a goods-to-person setup, where fleet-managed robotic carriers bring the mobile shelving directly to an ergonomic station, a human operator can suddenly hit 300 to 500 picks per hour. It is a completely different paradigm of efficiency. When we methodically compare these two models side by side, the financial logic becomes undeniable. An automated facility requires 60 to 75% less footprint to store the exact same 10,000 SKUs. Plus, it requires less than half the staff per shift. And yeah, the upfront robotic equipment is definitely expensive, but the sheer savings in those high-rent Tier 1 markets means the capital pays for itself in just 3.5 to 5.5 years. If you're paying Vancouver or Toronto rents, automation is no longer just a cool luxury, it's an absolute survival mechanism. Act 4, the Great Migration, or the hub-and-spoke realignment. Now, zooming out to the macro level, what happens to the businesses that can't afford to build vertical robotic hives? Well, national enterprises are completely realigning their strategies to circumvent British Columbia and Ontario's costs. We're seeing a massive shift toward the Calgary logistics advantage. Calgary has basically become Western Canada's primary inland logistics capital. It's got lower land costs, pro-development zoning, no provincial sales tax, and incredible intermodal rail connectivity. It's actually become more cost-effective to store bulk goods in Calgary and service the Vancouver consumer market by rail, rather than trying to warehouse everything in Greater Vancouver itself. Let's move over to Eastern Canada and see how this builds, because this exact same secondary hub migration is playing out there too. Distribution centers are fleeing the GTA and expanding way down the Highway 401 and 403 corridors into places like Woodstock, London, Brantford, and Waterloo. Out there, land costs are still 30 to 50% below core Toronto levels, but operators can still maintain same-day delivery access to over 6 million consumers. It's a strategic retreat, really, just to preserve their margins. This hidden crisis of geography, concrete, and robotics is fundamentally reshaping the backbone of our economy. So I want to leave you with this final thought. As low-margin distributors get pushed further and further away, and as multi-million-dollar robotics become basically mandatory to survive in our major cities, how will the hidden, soaring costs of industrial real estate shape the speed and price of your very own e-commerce deliveries tomorrow? Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the structures around you.